Hi, Tom. Nice to meet you.
Hi there. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you. Really glad to get the chance to speak with you on your work, philosophy. I know your work is extremely dynamic. You've written on a very wide range of topics, and a lot of that is of interest to me, and I believe to our audience, because you've written on emotions, OCD, obsession. What really got me interested and caught my attention is a local group that I belong to. They have decided to read one of your paper on death anxiety. Um,
Yeah,
and existential anxiety and death anxiety is something that I'm very much interested in and have been doing some
yeah.
work in. So I thought it would be wonderful if I get to speak with the author and see what's behind it.
I hope I can offer you some insights.
Abs- Well, I believe any insight comes out from these conversations, and yeah, I believe it will be thought-provoking. Before we dive into any specifics, actually, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself before we jump in? I know you have a really dynamic, rich life, so start wherever you like and go into any specifics or general um,
Sure.
dimensions you like.
So I certainly think of myself as a philosopher,
Mm.
and that's been at the core of my interests now for more than 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And it's very much my goal to develop a complete philosophy,
Mm.
a philosophy that can talk about uh, issues of personal well-being, but also issues about ethics and aesthetics and the nature of mind more generally. So
Mm.
that's really been my life project for decades now. Um, and that does come out of my interests as a child or the things I was worried about as a child. I was definitely driven into philosophy in a certain sense. So this particular paper that we are going to talk about death, I would say was really one of the stimulating worries that I had as a child that drove me into philosophy. And so it took me 20 years, though, to come to a point where I felt like I could write something productive about that issue.
It's certainly productive. I know the paper is only a part of, I think, a volume, a book that you're writing as well.
Yeah,
And it's very much about happiness and living a good life, eudaimonia.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
The working title of the book is Happiness for Mortals.
Ooh, I love that.
And it's roughly structured around the idea that there are certain issues that come up at different points in life. And so the last chapter of the book is this chapter on death as one of the final issues that we might be facing, but also one that is going to be kind of present as something that might worry us throughout the life course. And
Mm.
so having some sort of response to that, I think, is a major part of a happy life.
Mm. I may veer off our plan and ask if I were to, what do you think is the biggest block to human flourishing that you see, if you do see any general trend or theme?
I mean, people are unhappy for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
Um, One of the major things is how competitive life is, how
Mm.
often we find ourselves in contention with other people. The basic constituents of a good life are largely available to anyone, but so often we find ourselves getting caught up in situations where someone else has something that we want, or we desperately want something, but we feel passed over for it.
Mm.
So for sure, when we're dealing with causes of unhappiness, competition is going to be one of the big ones. But more generally, I mean, all the usual stuff,
Would
failed
that be,
loves and
yeah,
anxieties and all those
yeah.
kinds of things, right?
Would you tie the competition part with where the world is going and things like capitalism, or you think it's just human nature?
To some extent, it is a feature of human nature. I think we seek ways to compete against each
Mm,
other.
mm, mm.
And we have an instinct to compete.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's for sure cultural factors there as well,
Mm,
and economic factors
absolutely.
that make life a bit more of a hard scrabble than it needs to be.
Mm,
But still, I think there's something very basically human
yes,
about competition.
I hear you. Yeah, I've been reading a lot of Han Bing-chul. I'm pronouncing his name so terribly.
I don't know this person.
It's so I'm trying to find the book, but it's just a general critique on capitalism and neoliberalism, and he's
Hmm.
just one of them. There are lots of work written about it lately anyway. So maybe when you mentioned capitalism, sorry, when you mentioned competition, that's where my mind went right
Hmm.
away. Yeah. Going back to your paper, before we get into any specifics, I'm quite curious about your personal relationship to death anxiety. I guess we
Hmm.
all have a personal relationship to death anxiety, especially according to some psychoanalysts, all anxiety is a kind of death anxiety, whether or not we agree with it. But is that something you have struggled with, or are you more of like this passionate, philosophical, discursive investigator?
Uh, no, I would not say I was particularly dispassionate, at least on this issue. I would say there's certainly been long periods of my life where I would consider myself more than average anxious about death. So when I was a child, I saw a psychiatrist for a year about this issue,
Oh, wow.
and um, it did help to some extent seeing someone and just talking quite regularly with someone, but it didn't fundamentally deal with anything.
Mm.
In the end, it took my own thinking to properly address this. There's a paper I reference in mine by James Bailey called The Recognition of Nothingness. And in that paper, he describes how, oh, I had this one experience where I felt the utter horror and terror of death. Now let me tell you all about it. And I just had to laugh when I was reading it because I was like, what, you just once you had this experience? Try having this every day for 10, 20 years, then we'll talk.
Mm.
Right? Then I feel like you might have some level of insight into what this experience really involves. I mean, I'm not saying I disagree with the things he said in that paper. It's just it's very clear that some people are a bit more sensitive to this
Mm.
than others, and
Absolutely.
I was definitely on more on the sensitive side.
I also think some people more explicitly name it as death dread, where other people it may just get displaced everywhere
Hmm.
else without
Right.
them realizing.
It's possible,
Mm.
but I think one of the striking things you learn as you grow up that some people just really don't seem to care that much about death, right? And it's quite frustrating. You're like, don't you get it? Don't you see? But yeah, maybe there's some secret psychoanalytic thing going on there that we're not really aware of.
It depends which psychoanalyst we talk to. But you did share in
Okay.
your previous interview with another interviewer on YouTube
Hmm. Yeah.
about your partner not being particularly anxious about death.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't talk to her about it. It's too frustrating.
Yeah, I think most people are way less on the neuroticism spectrum than I am.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I get it. Whenever I have a small medical procedure, I kind of go through a life review and basically prepare myself for the ultimate every time.
Mm.
Um, so let's go philosophical. And in your paper, you set the scene by laying down some of the more classic philosophical arguments against the fear of death. Some of them I'm more
Yeah.
familiar with, some of them not so much.
Yeah.
And you walk us through several major attempts at reconciliation. Let's briefly sketch that for our audience and just share what f philosophers for millennia has been trying to propose. So the first one, I've heard it before, and I think at the beginning, because I'm a huge, well, I my way into philosophy was Marcus Aurelius Meditations, and I think he
Okay.
had something like that in it. So, but I think
Yeah.
it's originally an Epicurean argument, a symmetry argument that death is nothing to us because when we exist, I think there are maybe I'm confusing it, so please correct me. I think I hear two things. One is that, well, if you're not afraid of the time that you weren't here, basically before you were born, why are you afraid
Yeah,
of the time after? Because
right. That's the
basically it's the
symmetry
same.
argument.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
symmetry argument. But there's the other one that is about how that I find very less convincing and a bit more confusing, which is about how, well, if you're truly dead, then you won't feel pain. But then if you do feel pain, then you're not truly dead, so you don't need to worry about it. But we can
yeah.
just go with the symmetry argument.
So, well, they're both very similar in that both of them rely on the thought that while you are dead or not born, there's no harm even possible because all harm relies on experience.
Mm,
And the original thought is that if you truly die, there's no afterlife, then there's really nothing for you to fear whatsoever there. And of course, if you're not dead, if you're alive, then that's not a situation you're going to fear either, right? So either way, you shouldn't fear death. I think the symmetry argument of Lucretius is a way to just sort of shore up that persuasive idea that okay, you don't feel bad about the period before you were born, yet that's exactly how it will be after you die. So what's the big deal? Why are you worrying yourself about that? And it's pretty clear that people do continue to worry about this, even those people who are committed atheists or don't believe in the afterlife at all, who are completely convinced that death is nothing, are still completely able to feel terror at the prospect of such a scenario. Um, there's there's a lot of interesting psychology in that moment that I think we all talk about, but the basic observation to make for now is just people completely believing in that Epicurean point, nevertheless still manage to feel great terror at the mere idea that they might not exist someday. So that's the first big argument for sure.
yeah. You are so disciplined in not diving into your
I
um
wanna hold off
river,
for a
but
little bit until
I
we
know I really want to say yeah, but I think you make sense because that just get us into the fear of annihilation. We'll go there later. Let's go with the four classic arguments. So that's the first.
and that's the big one really. The other
Yeah.
three we can deal with more quickly.
Sure.
So second one is that immortality is bad. It
Mm,
would be just as bad as death in some respects. So I think part of the point of this argument is just to say that we're just not psychologically adapted to even the idea of immortality. The idea of infinity is just utterly horrific to us in just the same way as nothingness might be.
mm,
I don't find this one convincing either. I mean, I find it sort of an academic moot point anyway, because I don't believe immortality is an option. Um, but I don't find it convincing because if I don't want immortality, that doesn't mean I now also want nothingness instead.
yeah.
It just
Yeah.
seems like that's just two bad options that I have.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, not very persuasive in terms of therapy here.
Yeah. Tom, I don't know, something is shaking in your mic. I don't know if it's just the element in it or
I
there's
think
a
it's just my head moving a bit too much. I'll try to be less excited.
Oh, I don't want you to be less animated than you need to be. But yeah,
Okay,
there's a
don't
bit
worry.
of like a element
Okay,
shaking. I'm very
yeah,
sensitive. Most people might not even pick it up.
sure.
Um, is that slightly is it different or the same with Nietzsche's arguments of the eternal?
Eternal recurrence.
Yeah, it's different.
Um, no, yeah, well, I guess there's a point of similarity there for sure, because
Mm,
Nietzsche says, would you react with horror to the idea that you have to live your life over and over and over?
mm.
Um, but the difference, of course, is that you don't experience an
Yeah,
infinite
yeah,
prolongation of time.
yeah,
And
yeah.
even if your life was repeated, you wouldn't experience that repeat.
Gotcha. So I
So
read
moving on.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
go
I
on, go
read a
on.
lot of Stoicism,
Yeah,
especially Epictetus. He's like this blunt, wild soul who sometimes say things that might seem shocking if you take it too literally. But his argument is basically that it's irrational. You can't escape it. Why are you worried about something that's inevitable? I have never find any solace in that. Maybe that's why I never really find much solace in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Um, you compare this to being a rat in a cage headed off like Niagara Falls. I quite like that.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I can't do what he's proposing. He's just basically asking to stop worrying about what you can't control, full stop.
yeah. Epictetus always comes across as very impressive, like no nonsense. Just I'm going to think what I'm capable of thinking. I'm not going to worry about anything else at all. It's just clear that yeah, most people are not able to bring themselves into that sort of
Mm,
style of thinking.
mm,
I might say that if you do manage to overcome fear of death in other respects, that Stoic thought might start to be more impressive to
mm,
you. That some things are worth worrying about, and some things just aren't worth worrying about. I think that could still have application, but it's not able to fundamentally offer therapy, I think, in the first place.
mm. Okay, well, just a final one, the fourth one. Basically, we are a
Right.
part of nature, and I find a bit of solace in this. I remember when I was in Thich Nhat Hanh's Buddhist group, there's something
Hmm.
about like thinking about how the cloud becomes the rain, and the rain becomes the river, and then becomes a cloud again. And when I die, I just become a part of that element. So there's this eternal renewal because we are all a
Yeah.
part of nature.
Yeah.
And so we never really disappear because the atoms in the universe doesn't actually get any lesson just because our mortal body dies. We just transform into something and then we become, I find quite a bit of solace in that at the start at least.
I think you have to be very careful with that sort of
Mm,
thinking. It's very easy to over romanticize it.
mm,
So, yes, it seems to be clearly true that all the things that make us up, in some sense, will be recycled. It's also clearly true that we are absolutely a part of nature and that we reflect many of the same patterns that nature displays. But that's not the same as saying that you persist in any way after the death of your body.
yeah.
You, on various plausible conceptions of self, are
Mm,
this quite complicated biological organism. And
mm,
you're very much tied up with the specific structure that is achieved by all
mm,
these cells interacting. And so that's not going to be around, right? It's just the kind of constituents of you that are going to be perhaps passed on.
mm.
So it's yeah, it's far too easy to fall into this romantic notion of your consciousness sort of merging with nature, but we don't have good scientific evidence to say that that's what's going on.
You're breaking me.
Well,
No, I would say there is a part of me that got quite anxious when I read your paper at the start
okay.
because you are challenging some of the things that I have previously found solace in. That, oh my God, I don't want this to throw me into an existential flunk. I
So
read it
there there
anyway.
is there is something about the kind of related thought that I do find a bit consoling, and we might go a bit more
Just
into
go
it
there, just go
later on.
there.
But I do find that there is some reconciliation in the thought that the things that I really value, the things that I really love about the world and other people, those things do persist after my death.
Mm,
And that it isn't all about me in terms of I'm not the be all and end all of value in the universe. My experience and the loss of that experience does not mean that all these other things disappear.
mm,
So and again, this is sort of related to the Epicurean argument as well. People sometimes imagine death as this infinite nothingness,
mm,
but that's completely false. What happens after you die is that everything else is just still around.
mm,
And so that I do think is a reconciling thought
mm,
to some
mm,
extent.
mm,
It's just that if you do have a powerful thought, fear of death, it's not going to be completely satisfying because they still have a strong grip on yourself as being this very valuable thing, and you don't want that thing to disappear.
mm. Yeah, and it ties into, I think, your relationship to things like beauty and music and the way of
Yeah,
being in the world. And I
yeah,
would love to hear more about that.
yeah. Well, I'm happy to elaborate on
Maybe,
that.
yeah,
I
I
mean, I
know
do.
we keep suspending things, putting things on the shelf. Um, okay, let's do this systematically. So all the
Okay.
four arguments are intellectually sound, yet they fail to move us emotionally. Can you unpack that and why this philosophy fails here?
I just, yeah, as you say, I do think these arguments are fine arguments.
Mm,
It's just that if you are the sort of person who has a strong fear of death,
mm,
that fear has its own way of interpreting arguments. So if you say, oh, if you do this, or if you engage in this process, and it's going to help you accept death, the fear of death itself will, in some sense, resist. Will say, I don't want to accept your argument. I don't want to be at a point where I might accept this awful thing. So you have quite a deep resistance to the acceptance of such arguments. And that's why that fear is the thing that needs to be addressed or confronted more directly if you're going to make any sort of progress. And once you do that, maybe then you'll be more receptive to these other arguments that
mm,
philosophers have
mm.
come up with.
Yeah, yeah. And so we go back to what we briefly mentioned earlier. You describe how imagining your own absence, which is the symmetry argument, would bring us to. It actually
Hmm.
triggers panic rather than soothes us. And
Yeah,
that's the fear of not existing, fear of annihilation, that some people seem to be more prone to this than others. Also, we mentioned this that some people just don't seem to be plagued by these.
yeah.
What do you think makes people get stuck in a loop of imagination and panic, or as I do, hypochondriac tendencies, rather than being able to think about death more casually, intellectually,
Yeah.
discursively?
Yeah. I mean, this is a really important point about the nature of emotions,
Mm,
that emotions don't tend to be triggered by discursive or abstract thought. So we can have this intellectual discussion about death, but it's fine. It doesn't tend to trigger any deep reaction. What tends to trigger a deep reaction is a much more first person confrontation with the situation. So, you could imagine a dangerous animal wandering about and it has no impact on you whatsoever. But when it's right there in front of you, confronting you, and you have a real living sense that this thing is relating to me right now, that's when you're going to feel some kind of panic. And it's the same with death. So, at least some people have the tendency to put themselves imaginatively in the situation of dying or being dead.
mm,
And that first person confrontation with it, where you try to imagine what that would be like, and yet simultaneously you find that it's impossible to imagine what it'd be like. And all the resources you might have for dealing with that situation are simultaneously absent. That's what's going to trigger a powerful emotional response.
mm,
So, one of the first things you should do in terms of dealing with the fear of death is try not to get into that sort of confrontation. And that can be just a matter of developing skills and habits, I
mm,
think. So, it does help to like really truly grasp and understand that what you're imagining is in some sense impossible. You're imagining being in a situation in which your being is not present. Something paradoxical about that. Not that that's going to persuade you to not do it, but understanding that could perhaps encourage you to think, well, I have this habit of thinking in a certain way. Maybe I ought to try and redirect it. But the other thought about that is just that we really do have a capacity to change the way that we think about certain issues. So it is, of course, an experience of life that things will just occur to you, or that your child hasn't come home yet. You start worrying about what might have happened to them. So our imaginations can get away from us in various ways. Even so, it is, I think, always possible to redirect one's imagination and to change the style of imagination such that you can take it from a more imagistic or first personal confrontation with a situation into one of these more discursive or abstract forms of engagement. So you don't have to stop thinking about death at all. Yeah. And, just like any sort of imaginative test where it's like, try not to think of something, if you try to do that, it's not going to work. And so we say, okay, it's fine. Think about death as much as you like, but just change the format of your thinking about it. So avoid this sort of imagistic confrontation, which is pointless and just going to make you feel terror, and shift it to a different sort of engagement. And then you will start to be able to cope with it a lot better, at least to the point where you'll be a bit more receptive to other sorts of considerations.
mm. I work with a lot of people who are intellectually bright. Some consider them gifted. And I'm often very quite cautious about something what I call, you have heard the method of spiritual bypassing. This is kind of like an intellectual bypassing, like escaping into discursive thinking. Well, maybe I shouldn't use that word because so yeah,
That's
basically in
okay.
over intellectualizing and rationalizing. I don't know
Hmm.
where the line is where it just becomes a kind of dysfunctional avoidance and rumination
Yeah, and I
and
think that's a very fair
escaping
point.
from feelings. Yeah, I'm here to
It's
challenge.
yeah, good. I mean, I think there could definitely be an issue of balance here,
Mm,
where
mm,
you could be avoiding issues by thinking about things in a certain kind of way. And indeed, there's a kind of anxiety you might get with regards to death that if you're always shifting into this more discursive, abstract, sort of puzzle thinking about death, you're kind of avoiding the real truth of it.
mm,
So this idea that you should shift to abstract thinking, it's not a fundamental solution because it doesn't deal with that idea that you might be just avoiding the issue.
mm.
More generally, I would say that anyone who's ruminating a lot and constantly turning over certain ideas, that person really needs to write things down and actually produce something a bit more definite from their thoughts so that they don't end up repeating the same stuff again and again and again. So, at least for me, like actually writing an essay was a major part of the therapeutic process.
Mm.
Maybe not everyone could do that, but everyone can do things where they try to take all those ideas that are, constantly churning away and they make something a bit more definite and stable out of that. That for
Yeah,
me, in all sorts of issues, has been
yeah.
very therapeutic.
There are all sorts of creative outlets. For you might be writing an
Yeah,
essay or teaching a
yeah,
class, and for others, they can make songs, write poems. For me, I find journaling helpful. I've got these things called the operational manual of my own. So I organize things that have been useful and I go back to them and they are indexed and everything. So
yeah.
yeah, I agree with that.
Oh yeah, it becomes such a habit, right? That there's like millions of words you might have written just about whatever you're thinking.
Yeah, sometimes I never go back to them though.
Yeah,
And then when I move house, I get sick of them and they all just go to the trash. And I also believe that if as long as it's done consciously, like, for instance, in psychotherapy, it's you're not often encouraged to distract yourself because that's just seen as a kind of bypassing and escapism. But then I think when you consciously do it, it can be a very healthy thing. If you're just ruminating, maybe it's okay to consciously distract yourself.
yeah.
So
No,
this
it is
when
certainly a kind of coping mechanism.
yeah,
It's just like any technique can be overdone
yeah,
or done in a bad way.
or compulsively and unconsciously.
Hmm.
You've also written about obsessive compulsive disorder elsewhere. I haven't read it, I have to admit it, but it's about intrusive uncertainty. So maybe it's about the experience of. I wonder whether you see your work on mental control and voluntary attention.
Yeah,
Yeah, addressing this because we are all scared of losing control, I think.
yeah. OCD is a very interesting case, and there's a few
Say
different mental
more.
disorders related to mental control. So, attention deficit disorders related, schizophrenia and autism are also related in certain ways. Um, but what's interesting about OCD, when you try to get an overview of all the various evidence and collate it, it does look like there's something biological going on that is triggering this sense of uncertainty or potential error towards whatever you happen to be thinking about at the time. You're just getting this kind of danger signal going off in your brain saying, hey, hang on, are you sure about that? Maybe you could be wrong about it. And that, in my opinion, that signal that's coming up biologically is then just latching on to whatever you might be thinking about at the time, such that you end up in these compulsive checking
Mm,
processes. And potentially being aware that there is this biological signal that's just hyperactively saying, hey, what if you're wrong? Being aware that that's happening could be a first step towards dealing with it.
mm,
But I do think in that case, like you probably need medication too, at least
mm,
for some of the serious cases of
Mm.
OCD. Medication is probably helping to kind of calm that signal down a little bit. I mean, particularly with OCD, it tends to interact with anxiety disorders. And
Mm.
anxiety itself is very uncertainty connected. It's one of the emotions that's particularly tuned towards uncertain situations. So if you have a strong anxiety problem, you could have a mild like kind of error signal, but they interact to create
Mm.
OCD. But you could have a very strong error signal and a mild anxiety, and that would still lead to the same result. But yeah, it's a fascinating case,
We can
and
have a separate
ra-
hour-long conversation about that.
it does raise these sorts of general issues about to what extent can we control our own minds?
Yes.
It's pretty clear that we don't have complete and total control over what we think, but we do have a bit, and we do have capacities to, if not, completely change how we think, to redirect it and reshape it and to elaborate it in different ways. And that can often be enough over time to start forming more healthy habits or more productive habits of thought.
Mm. Ah, now I am tempted to go into another big subject, which is that of which we don't
Yeah, we
have
still haven't
to.
we still haven't got to the really key points about the fear of death yet.
I know. Well, we'll go. I'm just okay. I'm just gonna park it. Maybe for the
Sure,
future. It's about free
sure.
will. Like I'm often
Yeah,
confronted with it. I need to come up with my own position on free will. I used to be
yeah,
very
sure.
deterministic. But then
Okay.
I read Epictetus, and I have to, yeah, have to believe that we have some control. And also, I think I got challenged a lot by clients when I work with them about, if we really do not have any free will, then what's the point of doing anything? Or why are we even talking? So yeah,
I
anyway, my conclusion is that we're co-fated. So that the whole
I mean,
story.
I have complicated opinions about that too, but I'll try and park it
Ah, okay.
for
Well,
now.
let's both try and park that and go back to our agenda. Do you want to
Sure.
get into the meat of it, or shall we go
Yeah,
religion?
yeah, sure. Sure. No, let's kind of get the key idea over first.
Okay.
So so far we've said, okay, there's a bunch of arguments for why you shouldn't fear death, but they're not particularly compelling.
Mm,
Meanwhile, we've sort of noticed that when the fear of death gets triggered, it's due to a certain sort of personal confrontation with that situation. And that potentially you can avoid that sort of confrontation by shifting to a more discursive sort of thought. However, that doesn't really deal with it. That doesn't really say that you shouldn't fear death in any deep way. So the deeper idea I had that I felt really did deal with the situation a bit more is that when we fear death, what's happening is that this particular way of confronting the situation is interacting with what I call our will to live.
mm,
And this will to live in a healthy person tends to be very, very strong. It's basically, I think, the summation of all your desires that uh, imply that you want to stay alive. And we see depictions of the will to live in all these different artistic cases. Cases where people are in impossible situations, but nevertheless kind of like claw their way over two broken legs down the mountain, right, to be rescued. But the will to live isn't a completely permanent thing. The will to live, we have the empirical evidence to suggest that it changes over the course of our lives. In particular, as people in fact age and they become less healthy, we do tend to see the will to live decline. And indeed, in the last kind of part of life, we do see this reduce to a point where people may honestly and sincerely report that they don't really have much of a will to live at all. And in this situation, there's also these interesting phenomena where just having one reason to keep going, like you just want to make it to Christmas, can be biologically efficacious. Like it can keep a person alive until just after Christmas. So this is, it's a fascinating thing. It seems to be a real thing that can be biologically efficacious. But for my purposes, the key point to draw from it is that if your will to live is weak, it really doesn't matter how much you are confronted with the situation of death. You will not have fear triggered because emotions require both components to be fully in place. And so the kind of reconciling argument is that we really can't empathize with ourselves at the time when we might be about to die. we are unable to project ourselves imaginatively into that situation in a fair way because our biological will to live could be in a very different place at that point. In fact, it's very likely to be in a completely different place at that point. And so when you fear death now, your will to live is very strong and it resists. And in a sense, that's just you experiencing your current vitality. Your fear at that point is your personal strength. But if you're about to die, there's a very, very good reason to think that your will to live would be at that point very, very weak. And so you wouldn't be having anything like a terror in that situation.
Mm.
And, I do find it quite plausible. I imagine what it's like. And there are times when you just feel very, very kind of like low that you're able to go, yeah, I can imagine that my will to live doesn't always have to be this hyper strong, constantly striving thing. And so it becomes plausible to me that at the point where I'm actually facing death imminently, um, I need not feel fear in that case. And now, while I'm kind of healthy and feeling it, well, it's not really a reliable guide to the future.
Mm.
So that's the kind of argument in a nutshell. Treat the fear of death as this psychological event that has these two necessary components, and that one of these components can change quite radically in such a way that you really can't predict how it's going to be in that situation. Or to the extent we can, it's very likely to be strongly reduced in that situation.
Interesting. But that's okay. I'm gonna challenge some of that.
Of course.
I can already imagine two challenges. One is more obvious, which is I think the phrase will to live itself probably triggers people to think, oh my God, losing the will to live
Yeah.
isn't that just depression? Shouldn't
Yeah.
that be something we fear, especially when you come from the background of psychology?
Yeah.
And for people who have indeed experienced depression, I think that's a very confrontational thought. You asking me to reduce my will to live? Are you crazy? So there's that. And the other
Yeah.
side might be, which I personally would think, I'm not confident. I mean, what if I'm 70 and 80 and I still really, really want to live? You are basically saying that it will naturally be reduced. What if mine doesn't? Hmm.
Yeah. So we could deal with those objections in turn. For sure, there is an association between depression and the reduction of the will to live. So again, it's one of the indicators of the reality of this thing and its changeability that depressed people can come to a point where they no longer want to be alive, right? But as you say, that sounds like a bad thing. I wouldn't want that to happen. I don't want to be in a state of suicidal depression. And so the argument here has to say, look, although there is this correlation between depression or a sense of, badness of life and the world and the reduction in the will to live, it's not a necessary connection at all. Plenty of people could come to a state where their will to live is reduced, and yet they're still able to say the world is a good thing. And that's where it kind of gets into the stuff about aesthetic values and the idea that there's a way of valuing things, a very pervasive and super abundant way of valuing things that does not rely on the strength of your practical interests. So there's that sort of response to that. Uh, Meanwhile, you're wondering, can you reduce the will to live? Or you're wondering, oh, when I'm 70 and 80, maybe I'll still have a very strong will to live. Yeah, I mean, there's no like obvious correlation between how old you are and how strong your will to live. It's a very kind of like rough correlation, right? The point is just to go, and really this is the point I want to make. The point is to go with your biology. If your
Mm.
biology, when you are 80, is still saying, yeah, I've still got plenty of gas left in the tank, good, go with that. Yeah, that's how things are going for you. It's just kind of, but track your biology and do not resist your biology. Yeah, don't try to form more ambitious or elaborate desires
Mm.
than your biology recommends. That's all. So, yeah, if you're currently feeling strong, you've got lots of desires, great, go live your life to the max. Uh, but if you are undergoing a decline and your will to live naturally is declining, then don't resist that.
Mm.
Yeah, allow that to happen. I mean, there may be situations where you think, actually, I know I need to try a bit more because
Mm.
someone really needs me, but I can't give you a completely foolproof method here,
Mm.
right? There's all kinds of variables that are going to be complicated and could easily go wrong, right? I'm just saying, in general, this is the right strategy to take to kind
Yeah.
of go with your biology as much as you can.
What might you say to someone who is not imminently dying, but live
Hmm.
with health anxiety?
Hmm.
Maybe their will to live is very strong, but so is their fear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fear is not a bad thing, right?
Mm,
If someone's worried about their health, that's going to motivate them to do all sorts of things to
yes.
protect their health, right? They're going to go to the doctor, they're going to follow their health regimen more closely. And that should be practically efficacious.
Mm,
Where it starts to become dysfunctional is that they fear so strongly that they can't think about anything else, they can't pursue their other interests. They're constantly uh, losing sleep over this sort of thing. So there, it does look as if their fear has come to a point where it's not able to be practically effective. It's not able to make clear changes to that person's life that, is productive for them. Well, that doesn't mean that fear itself is bad. It just means that it's being pushed too much, and you need to find ways or strategies to help you redirect, uh, or find values in other things that are going to help you
mm.
tamp down your fear a little
Going
bit. But
back to that
that's the
balance.
business of living, right? That's the kind of thing that psychiatrists are
Mm,
trained to help people to deal with.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. That's really thorough, and you've made your points about the
I
will
hope
to
so.
live. Yeah, that's one of the
Okay.
core tenets, but there are still a lot that we can discuss.
I mean, like, for sure, like one of the big things is like I don't want my will to live to decline. That is
Mm,
still going to be a persistent thought in these for this sort of argument that I'm presenting.
mm,
Um, and in some sense, I can't like force people to accept that, right? Again, it just as the fear of death can resist those other philosophical arguments, it can also resist these arguments. But what I think helps is to realize that um, your fear isn't necessarily a very good guide to how you will actually feel when your biology declines. And that
mm,
at least sort of puzzles you. That at least kind of makes you go, well, wait a second, maybe, yeah, I need to think about other potential approaches. And yeah, I need to at least imagine inhabiting a different kind of state of mind, one that might
yeah.
be more receptive to these more therapeutic ideas.
Mm. Sometimes a sense of doubt is all we need.
Yeah, sometimes. I've always found curiosity to be the greatest uh, force to fight anxiety. Just my life is kind of like driven between these two sort of forces, anxiety and curiosity, and for the most part, curiosity wins out.
You consider yourself a skeptic or not?
No, because I mean, I'm trying to formulate answers to every philosophical question that
So,
occurs
yeah.
to me, right?
You don't want to
So I
be in
can't.
perpetual doubt about everything.
It's certainly part of the method to constantly question, but ultimately, I
Yeah,
am seeking answers and trying to make answers rely on other answers and so on.
I like that. Because, their arguments is that just be in doubt about everything itself is quite therapeutic. Um, yeah. But I do
It's an
think,
intellectual virtue,
mm,
but like all virtues, it's in between two vices.
and
Yeah, so
we are
there's
human. I think we need some answer, something to hold on to.
yeah, yeah.
Mm. On that note, well, let's talk a little about religion as a solace. I think it's hard to not
Okay,
to keep that completely outside of the conversation.
okay.
In your discussion previously with Jason Chan, another YouTuber, you discussed how many people are drawn to religion for solace, especially for the comforts of the afterlife. You said something like, "Oh, but most people like a nice story and may not be drawn to something like a rigorous philosophical inquiry like the way you did." I agree that it's a tall order for many, but you also, well, basically, this is what we're talking about now. You suggested that the being curious is a real therapy. Can you explain more and can you sell it a bit more? Can philosophy really offer the same level of consolation, you think? How does it work? Because I think you and I both agreed a lot more people are drawn to religion than they are to discursive philosophical arguments or thinking.
Yeah, I think the way I'm going to respond to this
Mm,
challenge is to question why a religious picture is satisfying exactly. So suppose you believe in God and you believe that God designed the universe for a special purpose of some kind. Why should that now be satisfying to you? Like, what's good about that? Like, okay, so suppose God did design the world. Why should you care about that? Or why should you find that awe-inspiring or comforting in any way? It's it's not a final answer. You still need to be convinced that uh, whatever God has designed is something that's in its own right spectacular and wonderful. And I think that thought that the universe is this spectacular, wonderful thing that's valuable in its own right is just as available to the atheist as it is to the theist. So the point I kind of take from this is that, okay, I don't really mind if God designed the universe or not. What really is at the end point of all my valuing activities is to say, this thing here, this tree, this plant, this person, this philosophical theory, this book, or whatever, these things are all finally valuable in their own right. And that's ultimately the kind of the pole star that I'm aiming at when I'm trying to justify the value of the world. The kind of the supernatural or metaphysical mechanics there, they're just the means to that end potentially. So I consider myself an aestheticist in the sense that I believe that the universe as a whole and in virtually all of its details is aesthetically valuable. It's beautiful, it's sublime, it's dramatic, it's often funny as well. It has all these aesthetic values, and that's what's ultimately making me say, yeah, this is a good world,
mm,
not whether it's designed by God or anyone else.
mm. Yeah. We You seem to be addressing more theistic traditions like Christianity,
Sure.
where there is a personal God and individual afterlife. Whereas I'm
Mm.
also wondering about other more, well, I think people can argue about it, but pantheistic religion, if we
Yeah.
even consider them religion, like Buddhism and Taoism.
Hmm.
It, it does remind me of the earlier thing that we say is about of being atoms and returning to nature.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the nature of self and the continuation idea seems so fundamentally different. Do you think the same arguments applies, or we don't have to go into
Potentially.
detail? Yeah,
Potentially.
yeah.
I mean, for sure, they have different views on what the self is.
Mm,
So, um, some religions seem to believe in an invulnerable soul. Other ones believe that it's all just a kind of bunch of processes interacting
mm,
with each other.
mm,
I still think either way, you're ultimately asking a question about what's of final value in the world,
yeah.
and that's compatible with different ideas about what the self is. I mean, the Buddhists and the Christians will still ultimately try to find ways to say why this is a good world. And to some extent, they've both got their pessimistic aspects as well. So, Christians will believe that there's a presence of evil. Similarly, Buddhists will say that, there's suffering going on, particularly due to the illusions of the self. Um, and I think anyone has to deal with the kind of dark aspects of the world as well, even if you don't believe in any of these particular metaphysical pictures.
Mm,
But that's again something I think is compatible with aesthetic appreciation, that you can still take things morally seriously. You can still say, yeah, this is something morally bad that we should try to avoid. Nevertheless, taking that wider perspective, I see how things are part of these larger systems. I see how human nature has these fascinating features.
mm,
And so it has to be possible to simultaneously say, yes, the world is good and amazing and complex and beautiful, but it's also messed up in all these ways too, right? It's also full of like people doing awful things to each other, natural disasters and things like that.
mm.
You can simultaneously believe both things.
Yes, this is a slight diversion which we haven't planned. I've never
Okay.
personally found much solace in the existentialist ideas around just life is absurd, so you just accept it. I wonder if you can help me wrap my head around it. Or do you feel the same?
So why is life supposed to be absurd on these views? That's the question, right? I mean,
So that's done. Done. Refuted. Useless.
like there seems to be a suggestion that if there is no God, and there's nothing that's designed the universe to be the particular way that it is, then life is absurd. I just don't see why that would be, because God could equally have an absurd purpose in designing us. He could have just done it for a joke or something, right?
Mm.
That wouldn't make it a better situation. But it's similarly, the idea that the universe hasn't been designed, well, I don't see how that makes uh, life absurd. Uh, the idea that there's no logic to the universe at all, that it's kind of just sheer randomness, I think that would be quite horrific. I think that would be quite a nihilistic perspective to take, but I just don't believe that is the case. I think that,
Thank you.
what the glories of 20th, 21st century science is that it has revealed that the world is orderly in all these interesting ways, and that it is quite likely that things do hang together in a very fundamental way, such that it's not all just random.
Oh, thank God. I was afraid you would say otherwise. I would like to believe in some kind of providence and yeah, good.
I do think, well, I'm not sure I call it providence or fate or anything like that, but I do think everything does ultimately hang together, and that there are some
Mm,
very, very deep truths about why things are the way they are.
mm. Just that we may not be able to comprehend it, or shall
It
we
may
try?
not, well, it just may not be a big man in the sky who's making it that way. That's all. It may
Yeah,
be just something a bit more mathematical in nature.
yeah, yeah. Mm. I'm currently at that point, like at that point where you're describing, where I believe in some kind of order. It's not probably not a daddy in the sky, and I don't know what it is yet. And I'm not scientific enough to work out some mathematical order, but I am willing to learn more. But yeah, I am not ready to accept that it's all random.
I don't think we have any good reason to think that it is all random.
Some
Like
people find
science would
that
not have,
quite, some people are quite all right with that.
they might be all right with it. Doesn't mean it's true.
Thank you. I like that. Right. Let's move tiny bit away from death and go to happiness, shall we?
Okay, sure.
Um, I mean, they're ultimately all related, but I'm quite interested in your new book. There's something that caught my attention, which is about self-sufficiency. It
Yeah.
challenged me because I've been reading a lot about, like I said, Enchiridion, like Epictetus, or
Hmm.
a lot of philosophers are probably at that camp in reducing our dependency on things. I mean, I've been studying Buddhism, so
Yeah.
it's a lot about relinquishing our attachment to things.
Yeah.
But I have also made the argument before that there's such a thing in psychology, counter dependency, which is this complete myth of just being on your own. It can be pathology in itself, was my point. So going back to your work, in your book,
Mm.
you wrote about the self-sufficient life, which sounds very positive to me at the start on paper. But you said it's
Hmm.
emotionally flat, like a lemonade left out for too long, like this lukewarm
Yeah.
existence where there's
Yeah.
no risk, no joy, no gratitude. I mean, I'm butchering it, but like no real. So, but then, there's so many philosophers, Aristotle, Stoics, Epicurean, Buddhist, they all prompted this as an ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really powerful idea that has you see it all the time in the ancient philosophers. This idea that the ideal life is one as self-sufficient as possible, and
Mm,
that the life of contemplation is good because it's a self-sufficient life. You don't need any major material resources in order to engage in it. Yeah, and and the reason why I think this might ultimately lead to a very flat sort of life is that if you do achieve full self-sufficiency, such that you need nothing at all outside of your own personal resources, yeah, yeah, there's no risk anymore. There's no sense in which you're relying on something that might not come off, right? This hyper-controlled life just seems very, very dull. But I think there's very little risk of that because it's such a fundamental fact of life that we are constantly dependent on other things. We're dependent on our environments in such a fundamental way. We're dependent on other people for all the various resources that we make
yeah.
use of. Um, and not just bodily, but mentally, we depend upon cultures. We depend upon interactions in order to stimulate our skills and various cognitive capacities. I have a line in the book that we're contingent to the bone. It's just that the fundamental facts of our existence that we have these deep contingencies. Um, and I think we ought to be embracing that. So obviously, there's a sense in which you ought not to rely too much on expensive consumer goods. Um, a degree of resilience is definitely a good thing, but that shouldn't lead you to think that relying on things and trying to maintain certain things and to care about your attachments to certain things, that's absolutely part of the normal good life for people in this world.
Mm.
And I don't think we should reject that at all.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, one of the arguments I sometimes say is, well, I am dependent on my local supermarket, the company. I'm dependent
Uh-huh.
on my neighbor not killing me all of a sudden. So there is a
Sure.
degree of inevitable, what do you call it in Buddhism? Uh,
J-
interdependency.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
can we, though, live in a way where we strike about but being in the world, being attached without being overly attached? Shall we, like the Stoics propose, meditate on losing our wife every day and the death of our children every day and imagine returning them in your
Right.
in
Right.
your philosophy?
Yeah, really, it does come down to the question about love,
Hmm.
right? So the Stoics seem to counsel against love
You think?
because you could, for sure. I mean, they accept that you can have family relations, but they do not think you should love in any something like the contemporary sense of love, where you feel truly emotionally vulnerable
They probably just see
to,
it as more like an ethical responsibility or like a social role, don't they? Like
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
I'm a
They see it more
husband,
as,
so I'm gonna do what I need to do.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
They are not romantic in that
No, they're
sense.
not.
So the contemporary romantic idea of love is that, you are very much emotionally susceptible to how things are going for the thing or person that you love. So if they're doing badly, you're going to feel bad. If they're doing well, you might feel good. Um, you're no longer fully in control of your emotions. And that's something that the Stoic has to reject
Oh yeah.
utterly,
If you put it that way, absolutely. Yeah.
right? So to the extent that love makes you no longer fully in control of how you feel, Stoic is going to have to reject it.
Good
And that
point.
just seems like a terrible life, right? To reject love seems like a terrible life, even though it makes you vulnerable to grief and it makes you vulnerable to frustration, right? It just seems that it's, the cliche that it's better to love and lose than to not love at all.
Mm.
But it's a real challenge. Like the pains of grief are some of the worst things that you could possibly experience. So, the Stoics aren't mad to say that actually, yeah, maybe you ought to not do this. The costs might be too high. And so I have to do spend some time in this book that I'm drafting, like worrying about that. Like, is it worth loving when it can have these awful costs? And the best answer I came to is just that some things merit love. So for us to ignore other people or to ignore the other kinds of lovable things in the world would, in some sense, be a mistake. It would be failing to respond to what's out there. It'd be failing to respond to the values that are present. So, in some sense, it would just be a kind of blindness,
Mm.
a failure to recognize what is good. And yeah, it brings with it consequences that there might be costs that you get so attached to something that you end up experiencing terrible grief. But it's better than being blind to what is truly valuable.
Mm.
And even in grief, like recognizing the value of someone is part of that grief.
Yeah. It's better to have loved and lost than to never loved at all,
Yeah, I think
would be a
it's true.
position. Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, I do hear, yeah. I mean, some people never want to own a pet again because the last loss was so traumatic. But
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I don't have a
It's
finite
a
answer. I think
as
everyone.
I say, like there are very deep costs, and there's like an interesting growing literature in philosophy on the nature of grief.
Mm.
Um,
What is
And I
it?
think there are practical steps that people can take. Yeah, there's some very nice recent stuff.
Mm,
And one small point about grief that I think is very worth bearing in mind is that even if your loved one is dead, there's a sense in which their existence is still present. And like this
mm,
isn't just like fantasizing like their soul is present, although you can see how that's a very, very tempting thought. It's just that their fact of having existence, of having existed in the past, is still very much a live issue, and it's still very much shaping how the world goes. So often, the process of grief is still, in some sense, finding a new form of relationship with the dead loved one. It's a
okay.
transfigured sort of relationship, but it is still a
Yeah,
real relationship with
yeah.
something that's in the past.
I love that. Yeah, I can see how that would work. Um, except in times where it's a traumatic death, but we don't have to go there. I can see how the relationship itself can stay alive.
Yeah.
One of your biggest point about human flourishing is how you distinguish between what you call practical valuing, which is more about ownership, consumption, future benefits, maybe even the competition that you pointed to earlier, and what you call aesthetic valuing, which is appreciating things for their own sake. I think this is
Mhm.
one of your biggest theses. I would like you to talk a bit about. It's almost as though this is, I could be wrong, so please correct me. I think you do propose this as a kind of a solution to many difficulties we have, or a lot of the unhappiness we have, which is to cultivate aesthetic appreciation.
Yeah, it does play quite an important role in my general worldview. It's not the be all and end all.
Mm,
It's not sufficient for having a good life,
right,
I would even say.
sure.
But for sure, it offers a very, very powerful resource for appreciating life and appreciating the world around you. So that the kind of key proposition that I defend is that aesthetic value makes the world worthwhile.
Can you say a bit more what that is first? Because I think it might just be a phrase that's not familiar to many. And it's so easily mixed up with what is so popular these days in the wellness culture on mindfulness, meditation, just, you know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, aesthetic value is just the umbrella term for beauty, sublimity, comedy, drama, tragedy, cute, kitsch. The erotic even comes in there
Mm,
as well.
mm,
So aesthetic value is just all these different values that don't rely on making you richer or smarter or more popular or filling your belly or anything like that, right? They're all ways that you can be rewarded by something just from its mere appearance or just by merely contemplating the thing. So a sunset is beautiful and incredibly rewarding and pleasurable to look upon, despite the fact that it doesn't help me live any longer. It doesn't make me rich or anything like that, right? That's the basic idea of aesthetic value.
mm,
And the kind of the deep implication of that is that humans have this capacity to value things and to genuinely take reward from things, even when they're not being personally benefited by those things. That's a very profound, interesting fact about human nature and quite possibly many other animals
mm,
as well. We have this really quite basic capacity to transcend our own egoistic interests and just go, wow, that's a beautiful thing, or that's a hilarious thing, or what have you. And so this
Right.
is why it makes, yeah, well, sorry, let me
Yeah,
just
yeah,
very quickly just
absolutely.
say,
Sorry.
just, it's all right, I get too excited.
Me too.
Um, um, Now I've lost my train of thought.
Ah, sorry.
It was just the idea that this is what that kind of valuing is what makes it suitable for valuing the world, right? It's really the only way to value the world in its own right, to kind of see it as independent from your particular egoistic concerns. Um, yeah, if your valuing of the world was so tied up with your own egoistic projects,
Mm,
it would always only have a very limited range.
mm,
It would always be, oh, only insofar as it relates to me, then it's good. Well, that's only going to cover a very tiny amount of the world. It's going to
mm.
say nothing at all about Jupiter or the Andromeda Galaxy or quarks or what have you.
So aesthetic value basically is the sense of beauty and harmony. It's just an emotional response you get from the sensory emotional experience. This is a very rudimental challenge. I can imagine someone saying that you need the practical utilitarian things to in order to enjoy beauty because you need money to buy art or to go to a concert
That's
or to
art.
not worry about finance enough to be able to sit and appreciate the
Yeah.
forest.
Um, People have presented that objection to me, and I think it's um completely misguided.
Mhm.
So I think
Yeah,
there's a
go
kind
for
of
it. Come on.
I think there's a sort of patronizing attitude that people sometimes take towards poor people. That, oh,
Mm,
you just don't have the time and the capacity to enjoy beautiful things.
mm,
That's just completely false, right? I mean, completely impoverished people are completely able to appreciate the beauties of the world. And that's one of the things they might most do, in fact.
mm,
And people with very little resources, we see all the time engaging in like small little art projects. They might just be arranging their
mm,
local environments in various ways. But people are constantly attuned in this way, even when they are in a state of desperate poverty. I mean, certainly there's a sense in which if you're like currently your life is threatened and you're suffering enormous stress, that you might not have the mental space for it. But it. That's a kind of material problem.
mm,
Uh, as long as you have the mental space, it doesn't matter what your material resources are. You should be capable of valuing the
mm.
world aesthetically
Yeah.
and appreciating beauty and sublimity and all the rest of it.
With people who are still new to the idea, what would you suggest them do? Like, or to get familiar with it, or just to, it could be anything. A book that you would recommend, a mindset shift, or just an act.
The best way to help yourself start appreciating things aesthetically is to make art. There's no
Ah.
question, right? That I mean, but it's a natural process. You get inspired by a view, you want to take a picture of it, right? Everyone has that sort of impulse.
Mm,
You just see something amazing, you want to preserve it somehow.
mm,
And art is really just a development of that impulse.
mm,
So writing a story or drawing a picture are all ways that tend to start attuning you to the wider kind of glories of the world. So for sure, like maybe when you were a kid, you had various little art interests. Don't lose them. Yeah, keep hold of them, even if it's,
mm,
not very professional. I think art making has such a really important well-being role to play in people's lives.
mm. Yeah. Thank you. I'm sold.
Okay. I'll chalk no one up.
Well, I'm just thinking about the questions I have planned, and this I think we have addressed because it's about aesthetic valuing very much aligns with your philosophy about caring deeply and not just for what things can do for us. It's about
Mhm.
valuing them as they're here
Yeah,
and now. So
yeah.
that aligns. Nothing to challenge.
I
Um,
mean, I'm trying to make everything fit together ultimately. So
mm,
definitely having done aesthetics quite a lot in the past, bringing it then into the more practical interests about how we pursue happiness, it was important to find a way to reconcile
mm,
those two things.
mm. Yeah. Because you did say in your book that happiness is fundamentally a pattern of successful love, and not just
Yeah,
romantic love, but love of the self and
yeah,
community. Maybe just
yeah.
to wrap up our conversation, can you expand on that a little more so we kind of have a nice bow to the end about how a successful life it's about pattern of successful love. I think that's just beautiful. I guess I just want to hear more.
Yeah, this is the view. And again, it's a very anti-Stoic sort of view.
Go for it.
So the basic idea in saying that happiness is a pattern of successful love is just that a happy life is one in which you identify and orient your life around various points of absolute final value. So you can say, this thing here, this is absolutely valuable, and this thing over here, this is also absolutely valuable. And maybe even me, I'm also absolutely valuable in some respect as well. And the idea is just you're going to orient your life around these things. And what counts as successful love is just that you manage to stay engaged with the positive qualities of the loved one. So you're not constantly fighting with them. You're not destroying them. You're loving them in a way that they want to be loved.
Mm,
And generally, when that happens, they tend to return your love in some respect.
that's beautiful.
And so you are able to sustain this sort of engagement with
Mm,
qualities. And so an ideal life tends to have, a few different domains structured around these kind of key loves. So it could be your house and garden, it could be a pet, it could be a child, a partner, a parent. Um, and the idea is just, it's hard work, but ultimately cultivating those attachments, I think, is the kind of, in some sense, the common sense way in which people do pursue happiness and verify whether or not they're doing well in life.
And you really don't think that increases the fear of death because we are so
Oh,
attached?
it creates these potential problems for sure. That's why you need an extra chapter on that issue as well.
Hmm. I think I come to the myself anyway, and wise old men I have known do come to the idea in the end that this whole complete detachment is just not the way to go, this lukewarm existence. So in fact, his this is just someone I know, his argument is that it would reduce your attachment and to live the way you're proposing to love so fully. It would reduce the fear of death because you have no regrets, you've gone there rather than just wasted your
Mhm.
life away.
Sure. Yeah,
Mm,
that's very much like this point I was suggesting before that there are some things that are just valuable out there and you can't ignore them. Yeah,
mm,
it'd be a mistake for you to fail to recognize their value.
mm. Yeah. I would also put in a caveat though, not everyone needs to be in romantic love relationship. I do think there's a
Absolutely.
temperamental difference.
Yep.
Some people are better
Yep.
in community, or some people really are just
Yep.
you can
Yep.
just be in nature and be a hermit, but you can love nature deeply. So we're not saying everyone needs to be in a monogamous romantic love relationship for life to be
Yep.
meaningful. I think I just want to
Yeah,
put that in
absolutely.
there.
Absolutely. The view absolutely relies on the idea that there's a very broad sense of love. It is just about finding something that you're willing to say that is finally valuable in its own right.
You can be
But
Socrates and love wisdom and not
you
marry.
can't actually, I disagree. You can love wisdom. You can love philosophy because it's a definite thing that has a history
Yeah.
and like there's a whole set of practices surrounding it. But I don't think you can love abstract concepts. They
That's
don't
what
have a
Socrates says,
status.
right? Or am I
No,
just
no, no.
misinterpreting?
Like philosophy gets defined as love of wisdom. And
Um,
ironically, I don't think you can love wisdom itself. I think you can love Socrates and you can love a philosopher. You can love the practice of philosophy. Uh, And the reason for that is that it has to have a status in its own right. It has to be the kind of thing that can be doing well or badly in its own right. So I don't
ah,
think wisdom is capable of that. So it can't be nurtured in the same way that a person or a plant can be
interesting.
nurtured. But that's just the technicalities
No,
about what
no,
love
it's
is.
it's interesting. It's thought provoking. Right. Let me sit on that.
Sure.
Okay. Well, to summarize, oh my God, thank you so much. I have really, really enjoyed this.
Yeah, we've covered
Um,
a lot of ground.
we did, and I mean, I didn't really. We did have a vague plan, but I really enjoyed how it just unfolded. Um, I've already asked you something like that, but I would just try again and see if you can just make one suggestion, because I like our audience to sometimes have a bit of things to take away, even if it's just a philosophical reframe, something you say, or even a book or a piece of work for someone that's who are my audience? I mean, a lot of them, they may not explicitly wrestle with death anxiety, but I do think a lot of them have what they consider or what I might call existential anxiety, which is, oh my God, I'm not
Mhm.
able to do what I need to do in this life, or just I don't know what to do with my life. So such a vague, broad question, but that's for you to take it wherever you like and just give us a little gift towards the end.
I would say if you're interested in these issues about aesthetic value,
Mm,
by all means, check out my book called The
yes.
Aesthetic Value of the World. You can find it for free online, or you can just write to me and I'll send it to you.
Thank you. That's
And
very
a
generous.
PDF, that is. In terms of a message, a take-home message, um, particularly when we're talking about death anxiety, I think the key point to hold on to is that you have control over your imagination. That is something that is under your power. And even if it gets away with you for sometimes, it is always possible for you to start to redirect it and to build better habits.
Mm, thank you. I'm not going to
Okay.
post any challenge or questions to that because it will just go on, and I don't have any. It's
Okay.
beautiful. It's
Okay.
beautifully said. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Okay. Thanks.
All right.